When Kakashi stumbled forward and Naruto instinctively jumped out to grab him, his first thought was that it had to be a clone. Kakashi had to have switched himself with a body replacement jutsu. Any second now, the clone would dissipate, and the Jonin would jump down from a tree, with a hand holding Jiraiya's latest book. But Kakashi didn't disappear, and Naruto instead found himself staring down at a graying face. The bloody tip of a blade poked out from the Jonin's chest. It was a blow strong enough to have dissipated even a shadow clone. Which could only mean one thing. "Sensei," Naruto said, dumbly. When Kakashi didn't respond, he turned to the bound Sannin. "Can any of you heal?" Suddenly, he thought of all the times he'd passed over a medical ninjutsu scroll in favor of a ninjutsu one, and he felt his stomach twist. "It's unfortunate," said the Sand Jonin. "A blade straight through the heart like that." His throat turned dry. Naruto swallowed hard. "What are you trying to say?" It was a stupid question. The Sand Jonin looked plainly down at Kakashi in response. Naruto followed his gaze and saw that his teacher's face had turned ashen. That had to be wrong, so Naruto pressed his fingers to the crease of his neck and he couldn't find a pulse. Everything in Naruto's head was starting to spin. How could this be happening? Not 10 minutes ago, they'd been talking by the stadium. They were going to have a rematch soon. "Sensei," he repeated. Again, there was no response. Naruto's grip slackened, and Kakashi's hand dropped limply to the ground. Seeing that, Naruto felt something deep inside him tremble. "Watch out," a voice cried. Dazed, Naruto looked up. An ANBU wielding a blade had just broken out of the trees and was now heading straight for him. Was it an enemy disguised as one of their own? As drained as he was, it would have been a simple matter for him to parry the attack with his tanto. But he didn't move. Instead, he was suddenly filled with a deluge of thoughts and faces. His childhood caretaker, Mayu's mother. The other Jinchuriki taken by the Akatsuki before him. Rai. Mayu. Shirakumo. The undercover agent in Earth Country. Temari. And now, Kakashi. There were so many that had died before him. Because of him. If not for him, would they still be alive? The ANBU was almost on top of him, the blade flashing in the sunlight, and Naruto thought fleetingly. Did it matter? Her eyes bulging, Karen couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why isn't he moving? The ANBU attacker, seizing the opportunity, had gone straight for Naruto. It left him wide open, and knowing Naruto, he had ample opportunity to evade the attack. And yet, for some reason, he didn't move. Eyes fixed upon the descending blade, she jerked forward. The chains had disappeared once Gaara had fallen unconscious, and they didn't come out of her a second time. She was going to be too late. "Naruto," she screamed. Clang. All of a sudden, a blade met the ANBU's blade. It took Karen another second to process that it was Naruto's. Somehow, suddenly, Naruto had responded. The blow had sent the ANBU jerking back, his mask dislodged and fell off his face, to reveal a young man with glasses. At that, a faint look of surprised recognition flickered across Naruto's face. "You work for Akatsuki?" The man's lips curled back. "I thought I'd try my luck," he said, without responding to Naruto's question. But his gaze shot to the side, where Gaara lay unconscious, while Karen's chains had since disappeared. The Sand Jonin hovered protectively in front of him. "Guess I'll take my chances another time." Almost mockingly, he adjusted his glasses, and then taking a step back, he disappeared. A beat passed, Naruto staggered. Snapping back to attention, Karen hurried forward. "Naruto." Without thinking, she grabbed him by the arm. Why hadn't he been moving before? "Are you hurt?" "Stop," said Naruto. Karen blinked. "Stop what?" "Stop talking to me as if you know me." "Naruto. Let go of me." When Karen didn't move, Naruto raised his voice. "Let go of me." Frightened, Karen released his arm. She'd never seen him like this before. Instinctively, she searched blindly for his chakra signature, and what she found caused her heart to plummet. When they had fought in the Chunin exams in Wind Country all those years ago, he had been ruthless and intent, focused solely on his own team. When she had caught sight of Naruto in Grass Country, his chakra had seemed meandering, but still purposeful. When they had crossed paths in the Forest of Death and on the training fields, he had been reserved and controlled. Now, looking at Naruto, the only word that came to Karen's mind was lost. And the cause of it all, Karen's gaze drew down to the still body in his arms. Was he Naruto's teacher? The man's chakra signature was rapidly fading away, but she could still catch a glimmer of something. Naruto, I might be able to help. Naruto didn't respond. Perhaps he hadn't heard, or perhaps he was ignoring her. Whichever the case, time was running out. Karen felt her jaw set. While she had never healed anyone who was unconscious before, she had to try. Wrenching open the man's mouth with one free hand, Naruto jerked. She pushed her arm against his teeth. She felt canines pierce her skin, and blood, glowing with her life force, dripped down into his mouth. Karen could feel herself rapidly losing strength, but she clenched her arm, squeezing every drop she could into the other man. Nothing happened. What are you doing? Ignoring Naruto, Karen screamed, "Bite!" A moment passed. And another. Where am I? The sun was just rising on an early morning, and the villagers were out at market. Walking along a path winding through the village, he bounced excitedly on the balls of his feet. Excited? Him. Kakashi, said a voice he hadn't heard in a long time. He looked up, to see his father smiling down at him. Dad. Are you that happy about finally starting to attend the academy tomorrow? He returned the smile. Yeah. We should get something to celebrate. What would you like? Oi, Kakashi. A new voice interrupted his thoughts. There you are, you bastard. He veered around to see Obito and Rin speeding up to catch up to him. When he looked back, his father was gone. Is something wrong, Kakashi? Asked Rin curiously. It's nothing, he answered. The sun was high in the sky, beating its heat down on the back of his neck. Suddenly, something hard cracked down on his head, and he winced. Kakashi. I heard from Minato that you almost got killed on that last mission. And now, Kushina, let's not exaggerate. Came his teacher's voice. You're telling me 10 cracked ribs and a leg in a cast is an exaggeration? Slowly, with a limp to his step, he backed away from the enraged woman, when he felt something bump into his back. He turned to see two genin regarding him suspiciously. Kakashi-sensei. Said Rai. Don't you think it's about time you showed us what's under that mask? Well, how about some ramen, he said. If you're quick enough, you might be able to catch something. Rai's face brightened, but Mayu shook her head in disappointment. So you can eat your fill and then leave us with the check again, sensei. He smiled. Can't get anything past you, can I? He looked up at the sky, the sun was starting to set and the air was cooling. He thought he could catch the faint outline of the moon in the distance. Come on, sensei, hurry up, I'm starving, said Rai. Sensei. Aren't you coming? Mayu asked curiously. Oddly enough, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. But he couldn't quite put his finger on what it is. I'm coming, he said jovially, trying to brush it off. Just as he was about to follow his students' backs, he felt a hand grab his arm. Sensei, said a voice. Kakashi opened his eyes. It took a moment to reorient himself. His body was aching, he could feel a strange chakra rushing through him, stitching him back together. The missing eye no longer seared, and the injury in his chest had been reduced to a mere throb. And through it all, Naruto's blurry face looked down at him, shocked and uncertain. Sensei. That's me, Kakashi croaked. Red locks of hair spilled around him, looking to his side, Kakashi saw the girl who had reminded him of Kushina. She was unconscious, her face pale and drawn. There was a metallic taste in his mouth, blood. But before he could think on it much further, he felt his head spinning, and then once again, he lost consciousness. Hinata was beginning to lose track of how many she'd been able to save, and how many she'd eased of their suffering. Thankfully, she wasn't alone, she'd run into several other medic nin, and they divided the village into sectors for each to cover. In the face of such disaster, the fact that Hinata was able to contribute in this way brought a sense of burgeoning pride in her chosen line of work. She wondered what her father would think if he were to see her now. Lowering her hands from her latest patient, Hinata turned to the worried Chunin. I've stabilized her condition for now, but get her to the hospital. I heard that the ANBU have erected a barrier, so you should be safe there. Thank you, said the Chunin, scooping up her patient, while her face was still pale, her breathing had somewhat eased. If there's anything I can do. Go. With a nod, the Chunin disappeared. Hinata let out an exhale, and stood up. As expected, she was starting to feel the strain of using her Byakugan so many times. Fortunately, the battle seemed to be winding down. While the number of wounded was still disproportionate to the number of available helping hands, the injuries were becoming less critical in nature. Hinata had turned to move on to the next district, when she heard a sound. Coughing. Reactivating her Byakugan, Hinata held up her hands in a defensive position and cautiously advanced. There was a man there, hidden behind what used to be a pharmacy but was now a smoking ruin. Hinata turned the corner and saw the man, deathly pale with black hair. She'd never seen him before, but somehow, he looked oddly familiar. Just as he came into view, he hunched over and heaved. Blood splattered the ground. She didn't know whether he was an ally or an enemy. But she had made an oath to protect the injured, and so she asked, "Are you all right?" At the sound of her voice, the man jerked, his eyes weary and unfocused. For a moment, he looked up at her, but Hinata had the odd sense he wasn't really looking at her at all. An instant later, he broke out into another bloody coughing fit. It had been a stupid question. She could tell from a single glance that he was dying. Without any further hesitation, Hinata rushed forward. The moment she touched him, the man stiffened, but as soon as the glow of medical ninjutsu emanated from her hands, the lines in his face relaxed a margin. As Hinata further examined his body, she felt her brow crease. This man wasn't a casualty of the battle. No, the illness in his body was one that had advanced over many years. Judging from the level of damage to his internal organs, it looked as though it had started in his lungs, before spreading to the rest of his body. His liver and kidneys were also beyond repair, likely, a result of abusing pain medication. Hinata had seen the like in some older shinobi, though it was her first time seeing this level of destruction in such a relatively young man. It was a miracle he was even conscious. For a moment, Hinata considered doing what she had done for so many others so far, stop the weak beating of his heart, and allow the man to go peacefully. It was likely the kindest option, given how much pain he must have been in. But just as she'd laid her hands over his heart, she heard him whisper hoarsely. "Sasuke." Hinata stopped. As in, Uchiha Sasuke? After a moment's pause, she drew back. Placing her hands instead over his head, she pressed several key points in the man's brain. Slowly, Hinata felt him relax as pain-relieving endorphins spread throughout his body. There wasn't much else she could do for him. Even with the help of her Byakugan, it was far beyond Hinata's capabilities. The disease racking his body was like a million little dust particles scattered throughout his system, destroying him from the inside out. But something in his eyes told her that he wasn't ready to go quite yet. Hinata decided she would take him to the hospital, and once the battle was over, she would look for Sasuke. Though she didn't know him very well, she'd barely talked to him even though they'd been in the same academy year, she figured there must be a good reason for the dying man to have called his name. Lightning flashed. The sound of 1,000 chirping birds echoed through the clearing. Before the team of enemy ninja could even retaliate, Sasuke had ripped through their abdomens in a line. 3 bodies fell in an identical slump to the ground. The ear-splitting sound faded as he straightened, his eyes glowing dully with the Sharingan. "Sasuke," warned Sakura. She needn't have wasted her breath. Sasuke was already turning, his kunai moving in a blur as it slashed across what appeared to be a humanoid puppet creeping up on him. His eyes followed the faint glow of chakra string connecting the puppet to its master, and he followed with a quick flurry of shuriken. His aim was true. In a rustling sound, a 4th body toppled out of a tree, landing hard on the ground. Sakura ran up to Sasuke, her eyes shining with admiration. "That was amazing. But I expected nothing less from you." Without responding, Sasuke regarded the bodies on the ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Was this enough? Had he managed to close the distance even just a little? With the way he was now, would he be able to defeat Kakashi? Naruto? His brother? "I hope everyone's okay," said Sakura, looking back at the rooftops peeking over in the distance. "Do you think we should head back?" "They'll be fine," Sasuke replied. "I'm going to check the perimeter once again." Without waiting for a response, he took off. Sakura's footsteps soon followed his. "What you found out there, was it worth it, leaving behind everything?" When he had asked the question on that night, Naruto's response hadn't been what Sasuke had expected. "If you have to ask, you already know the answer." Eyes narrowing, Sasuke felt his pace pick up in speed. The surrounding scenery became a blur. Sakura's footsteps faded behind him. "Jiraiya-sama." An ANBU appeared before him, his head bowed in deference. "The Sound Nin have been taken to be interrogated, as you ordered. The Aim Nin have retreated, and the remaining Sand Nin have all surrendered." "Very good," he answered, faintly. As soon as the barrier had gone down, with Jiraiya distracted, the missing Nin Sasori had disappeared from battle. Presumably, he had fled the village. With how desperately the hidden sand had been searching for the third Kazekage, they would no doubt be very interested in the information Jiraiya now had for them. It begged the question of just how involved the sand had been in the invasion, as well as how deeply the Akatsuki had managed to infiltrate each village. Jiraiya-sama, what is your next command? It seems some of the ANBU had taken the third's dying words quite literally. I leave it to you. Maybe they had been meant to be taken that way. His heart sinking, Jiraiya thought of what inevitably lay ahead. A thorough search would have to be conducted of the hidden leaf as well. Given Sasori's level of mastery in puppetry, Jiraiya would have been surprised if they hadn't slipped a sleeper agent or two within their ranks. It would go a long way towards explaining how such a disaster had managed to sneak up right under their noses. Standing on the rooftop, Jiraiya surveyed the smoking remains of the village around him. A cold breeze swept through the area, a lone leaf swirled through the air. When Kakashi opened his eyes again, he was no longer on the battlefield. He was in a makeshift hospital room, with an N4 attached to his arm. It seemed like a supremely unnecessary gesture. Kakashi hadn't felt this great in years. Whatever it was that had fixed him had completely healed even his cracked ribs from his bout with Naruto the previous week. It was dimly lit, it may have been night, or it could have been a new day. Kakashi couldn't tell due to the curtains that surrounded his bed, separating him from his neighbors. The groans and murmurs of a dozen others sounded in his vicinity. A single figure sat besides the bed, red head resting in his hands. Naruto, said Kakashi. At the sound of his voice, Naruto immediately looked up. Seeing Kakashi's face, his expression melted into relief. You're awake. What happened? That hunter Nin who was with Zabuza sneaked up on you. I see. I was being too careless. Kakashi swallowed hard, silently rebuking himself. But Naruto shook his head. No, it's my fault. I didn't kill that hunter Nin when I had the chance, and he tried to get his revenge. Kakashi winced, the acute memory of being stabbed through his chest was coming back to him in fragments. He came at me in my blind spot. Raising himself up on his elbows, he touched a hand to his bandaged chest. I thought I was a goner for sure. Thank you, Naruto. It wasn't me. Oh. Karen is the one who healed you. Karen? Kakashi repeated thoughtfully. One after another, the girl was full of surprises. Well, I'll have to thank her personally then, when I can. Privately, he thought he would have to inquire after her lineage as well. Naruto nodded. Yes. How's the rest of the village? Any more deaths? Said Kakashi as lightly as he could. Menma tried to go after Haku, but, well, he's in stable condition now. And last I heard from Sasuke and Sakura, they were still in the search party for wounded. Anyone else? The Hokage is dead. Kakashi breathed in sharply. Raising a hand to the bridge of his nose, he pinched it. Ah. For a moment, the two were silent. Several beds over, the occupant began to cough up what sounded like half of their lung. Suddenly, Kakashi thought of the last time they'd been in the hospital together, back during the Chunin exams, in the hidden sand, when Naruto had passed out from the effects of the taboo seal. That time around, Naruto had been the one in the hospital bed. You know. None of this is your fault, if that's what you're thinking, said Kakashi. Naruto shrugged. Even if it's not my fault, I am one of the reasons this happened. Both today, and before. He wasn't wrong about that. Wherever tragedy struck around Naruto, his Jinchuriki status had always played a role. Is everything alright, Naruto? You're the one in the hospital. You know what I mean. Silence ensued. The curtains surrounding the bed jostled as a pair of cursing medics ran by. Kakashi felt his foot fall asleep. Finally, Naruto said quietly, It's hard, sensei. I know. Does it ever get easier? Kakashi considered it, thinking of all the times he had prayed at his former teammates' graves himself. A bit, over time. There was no response from Naruto, who instead looked down at his lap. Kakashi felt his gaze soften. His student had led a difficult life, exceptionally so, even for a ninja. And when Naruto kept so much to himself, it was increasingly easier to forget how young he still was. The curtains shook again. This time, someone entered the adjacent room. As voices started to murmur, Naruto got up to leave. Kakashi cleared his throat. Our team. Let's visit their grave together soon. It was something he had meant to bring up for some time now, and he felt ashamed it had taken him so long to finally do so. Naruto stopped, his back turned to Kakashi. A beat passed, a still moment in which unfamiliar voices sounded in the dim light and Kakashi held his breath. And then, he nodded. Right, he said in a tight voice. As was standard procedure on the battlefield, Hinata was stopped by the ANBU manning the barriers surrounding the hospital. My name is Hyuga Hinata. I'm a Chunin-level medic Nin, here to transfer a patient for intensive care. Did you identify the patient? No, I could not. The ANBU nodded, and stepped back to signal the others to temporarily grant them entry, when his head veered down towards the man's face. In any other situation, it would have been almost comical how far back the ANBU jumped. Uchiha Itachi. Hinata's pulse quickened and she connected the dots in an instant. That explained the strange sense of familiarity. Not only did the man resemble Sasuke, he was an infamous S-rank missing Nin. At Hinata's medical orientation, he had been listed as a Category 5, someone who all medic Nin should flee at the sight of, regardless of whether any wounded remained on site. 3 other ANBU had already appeared as backup, and Hinata knew if she let it go on much longer, she could very well be facing an entire platoon, agents who'd be better spent out fighting on the field, instead of trying to arrest an already half-dead man. Please, I give my word as a medic, that this man is in no condition to be a threat to anyone, said Hinata. Uchiha Itachi is a master of deception, the ANBU snapped. Stand down, medic. Hinata hesitated. Regardless of the man's identity or past, he was dying and needed immediate medical attention. However, be as it may, in the face of hierarchy, the opinion of a mere Chunin carried very little weight. She lowered the man's body to the ground, and in an instant the ANBU swarmed him. When Naruto had last left his apartment, he had walked through a crowded, bustling marketplace filled with the sounds of villagers going about their daily routine. Here and there, he'd attracted whispers and sometimes glares, and he'd caught bits and pieces of mundane conversations about everyday lives. Now, as he returned to his apartment, the way was silent, punctuated only by the occasional shouts of passing scouts and medics. The last of the fires had only just been put out, not a single part of the village was untouched. From what he'd overheard at the hospital, there were at least several hundred dead, mostly Chunin. While they had managed to capture some enemy ninja, it would take the intelligence division some time before they could extract any useful information, and by then, some worried, it would be too late. The outlook for the Hidden Leaf was grim. And at this time, when they needed strong leadership the most, the Hokage was dead. The situation couldn't have been any worse. Ironically enough, beyond the dark smoke still clouding the Hidden Leaf, the skies were clear and blue. It was a beautiful day. The way home had long been ingrained into Naruto's muscles. Step by step, he passed through the smoking ruin of the village. Even without the familiar landmarks to guide his way, it didn't take long for Naruto to find his apartment. Or, rather, what remained of it. A chunk from an adjacent building had crashed straight through it. The only thing left now was a pile of bricks. All of his possessions, few as they were, his books, his spare tanto, were gone. He hadn't considered that his apartment would have been reduced to a pile of rubble. But, he supposed, there was no reason why it would have been spared. Sitting down on a lone slab of rock, Naruto rested his head on his knuckles. A breeze swept through the area, and he closed his eyes. His head, once full of an unending cycle of questions, felt clear at last. Naruto had never really understood why he, of all people, had been the 4th Hokage's son. Why he'd been made into a Jinchuriki, and why his teammates had died. Why, even now, he continued to live and breathe. But as it turned out, the answer he'd been searching for was something very simple. There was nothing Naruto could do about what had happened to him. He killed, sometimes because his mission required it, and at times unnecessarily. His teammates had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and paid for it with their lives. Kakashi, too, should have died, but he had been fortunate enough that someone who could heal him had been there, in the right place, at the right time. Or maybe, it was because Naruto had once decided on a whim to help a starving girl. The bottom line was, there was no rhyme or reason as to why things happened. There were only consequences, and whoever was left afterwards had no choice but to pick up after the rubble. It was a cruel and unfair world. Did it have to be that way? Opening his eyes, Naruto raised his gaze to the sky. The vast blue was starting to take on an orange sheen as the sun began to set. Tomorrow as well, the sun would rise and set. While the leaf may have been in mourning, the world would continue to move. Slowly, Naruto raised a hand to his chest. The void was still there, and perhaps it was true, that nothing would ever be able to fill it up. But despite everything, Kakashi was alive. And at that moment, Naruto was glad to be, too. The once vibrantly lit Hidden Leaf Village had fallen into darkness. The gates were slammed shut, and Ninken prowled the perimeter. A new sensing barrier had been erected around the ruined walls. Would-be visitors were turned away by border patrol, while exit permits were put on temporary hiatus. With the end of the invasion, news had quickly spread of the third Hokage's death, and the village entered lockdown mode. Within the village itself, uninjured genin were instructed to guide newly homeless citizens toward shelters for aid, while able-bodied chunin and jonin were divided into squads and given direction to either assist in rebuilding or gathering intelligence. As the torture and interrogation force, led by the infamously scarred Ibiki, headed off to one block of the Intelligence Division's prison, members of the analysis team splintered off to various different sectors. Their leader, Yamanaka Inoichi, was curiously absent. His only daughter just died in the hospital, whispered one agent to another. Poison, I heard. None of the Sannin they interrogated knew what the antidote was. With that, they directed a nasty glare towards their cell's solitary inhabitant, a rusty-haired young man with dark-rimmed eyes. When the other cells were bursting to the seams with captives, his special treatment was due to the fact that he was the host of a tailed beast. However, while appropriate measures had been made to contain him if things got out of hand, Gaara of the Hidden Sand had thus far been unexpectedly quiet in his shackles. In fact, he seemed to be spending most of his time meditating. The report said he killed his own sister, said the agent. I guess it's true what they say about these Jinchuriki. Makes you wonder why we don't just lock ours up. Shut up, warned his fellow agent, gesturing to the cell. Gaara's eyes had opened, and he glowered at them now. Even with the bars of the cell separating the young man from the agents, they felt a shiver run down their backs. Don't go giving us that look now, said the agent with a scowl. You're only safe now while the top brass decides what to do with you. As had become the norm, Gaara didn't respond. His face didn't move. If it weren't for the sheen of the light in his eyes, he would have looked like a corpse. Through the night, Gaara continued to bide his time. Thinking. Clouds filled the sky and hid the moon. It was a dark night, doubly so with the absence of the light that usually emanated from the village. The only lights now were that of the hospital and the torchlights of the sentries pacing the walls. While your average civilian may have balked, for Jiraiya, it was a more than welcome sight. Less people walking about and limited visibility simply made it easier than ever to leave without attracting unwanted attention. Especially when he'd had a hard enough time shaking the ANBU on his tail as it was. Sending a shadow clone ahead to distract the nearest sentry, Jiraiya nimbly scaled the wall. Reaching the top, he stood still for a moment, listening to the wind. It was so dark, he couldn't even see the village rooftops anymore. Or at least, whatever remained of them. The village would be alright, he told himself. He'd done his duty. The village would suffer for a while, but it would be alright. It always was. I leave it to you. That had been the third's final words for Jiraiya. No doubt, he had wanted him to finally settle down as Hokage. However, Jiraiya thought that, with the fresh blood on his hands, he deserved a break. A long one, where he could write, drink, and enjoy a fair woman's company, not necessarily in that order. And anyways, he would be a terrible Hokage, Jiraiya tried to reason with himself. He didn't belong in that tiny office, signing papers and ordering people around from afar. He needed to be out there on the field, gathering intelligence for the village, as he'd always done. He could just imagine the look on the third's face, disappointed. Sorrowful. Still, Sarutobi-sensei would have understood. Goodbye, he said. The wind carried his voice away into the black night. In the distance, a Ninken perked its ears, and barked up at the wall. But there was no one there. As soon as Ichiraku Ramen came into view, Naruto let out an exhale. Somehow, mercifully, the building had been left more or less intact. Even if it had been destroyed, the popularity of the ramen stall ensured that it would have been rebuilt. Nonetheless, there was something reassuring about it, at the very least, having survived the invasion. However, as Naruto grew closer, he realized that the lights were off and that a sign had been placed outside. Closed until further notice during mourning period. Thank you for understanding. Cat got your tongue, came an unfamiliar voice. Naruto blinked, and looked to his right. It took a moment to place the source, a toad, perched just beside the sign, its pebbly skin blending right into the ground. It was holding a scroll in its tongue, which it offered up to Naruto as soon as he'd spotted it. After a moment's hesitation, and a quick check to ensure that it wasn't booby-trapped, Naruto opened it to reveal a parchment filled with beautiful calligraphy. He instantly recognized the handwriting. It was Jiraiya's, and he knew in an instant what it meant. Jiraiya was leaving the village. While unfortunate for the leaf, it wasn't difficult to ascertain his reasons. As a jonin, Naruto had been allowed to read the full report. While stopping Gaara had played a big role in ending the invasion, one of the other main players had been Jiraiya, who had finally slayed Orochimaru. Though Naruto didn't know the entire history behind the rift that had broken up the trio of sages, he knew how difficult the decision must have been for Jiraiya. Against all odds, Naruto had been hoping Jiraiya would stick around afterwards, but the sage wasn't called a hermit for nothing. From the sounds of it, however, the other ninja had been expecting Jiraiya to take up the Hokage position. The question was, with the man gone, who would step up to take the reins? The toad that had delivered Jiraiya's message had an interesting body composition. Its own middle section appeared to be made up of a scroll. No doubt, it was related to the other part of Jiraiya's letter. Once he'd committed the letter to memory, Naruto gestured towards the toad, which jumped towards his face. In a single leap, it wriggled into his mouth, and he swallowed it. Resisting the urge to throw it back up, Naruto wiped the slime from his lips. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement. Anbu? Were they following him? Acting as though he hadn't seen, Naruto moved on. However, now that he was aware that he was being tailed, he soon picked up on it two others within the vicinity that followed his every move. It seemed the time had come at last. He would have to confront that which he had been putting off for the past several years, his destiny. But unlike before, Naruto could feel resolve smoldering in his chest. Unlike before, he knew he was ready. Who are you? Someone who's going to change this world. Funerals were a terrible ordeal for everyone involved. While it was their chance to send off the deceased, it also made their absences feel all the more acute. The entire village had turned up for the massive event. Even the wounded had hobbled out in crutches and wheelchairs to pay their respects. There wasn't a single person who hadn't lost a family member or a friend. Hinata felt her heart tremble when she caught sight of Menma's pale face. His own face heavily bandaged, he'd come to find her, begging her to help Ino. Unfortunately, she had already been in her final death throes. The moment Hinata activated her Byakugan, she knew the poison had spread too far, shutting down all her systems. The most she could do for her former classmate had been to ease some of the pain before she succumbed to it entirely. Ino's teammates, Shikamaru and Choji, appeared to be at a loss for words. Ino wasn't the only familiar face staring down at her from the wall of the deceased. Her old teammate, Kiba, and her academy teacher, Irika, had also been killed in action. When Hinata saw Akamaru at the edge of the crowd, his ears and tail drooping, she took him into her arms and finally began to cry. The orders from above had been abrupt and to the point. Keep the Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto, under constant surveillance. Avoid detection at all costs. Do not engage in combat. Target is a trained sage. If target tries to leave the village, alert the Hokage immediately. Fortunately, their target appeared to be suffering from chakra exhaustion. Aside from visiting a jonin in the hospital, he spent most of his time sleeping. Oddly enough, while most of his colleagues made use of the relief shelters, the target seemed to prefer sleeping outside. That, however, was the only notable observation made after 2 full days of surveillance. Though his 2 fellow root operatives didn't seem overly concerned, Sai knew better than to lower his guard. Though he hadn't interacted with the target since their mission to Wave Country, the target had left a more than lasting impression. Of course, he kept such thoughts to himself. That was why, on the dawn of the 3rd day, when Sai suddenly realized he couldn't reach the other 2 root members, he wasn't too surprised to feel a cold blade suddenly press itself to the back of his neck. "Why am I being followed?" said his target into his ear. "You know why," was his only response. A pause. "Where are they holding the captives from Grass Country?" Sai thought about it, and then told him. Idly, as he waited for the finishing blow, he thought about the picture book he'd never managed to finish. Instead of a searing pain across his neck, however, he felt something hard hit his head. Bright circles filled his field of vision, and then nothing. As Kakashi left the hospital, he thought he could count himself among the more fortunate ones. While he may have been missing an eye, not only did he still have all 4 limbs attached, but they were also fully functioning. Others, some being forcefully discharged by the looks of it, to make room for incoming wounded, were not so well off. Even with medical ninjutsu on hand, there was a limit to what their medics could heal. More often than not, the grim expressions of the discharged indicated a long and laborious recovery, if not outright early retirement. A man with a bowl cut was waiting for Kakashi outside the hospital. 48 to 48, said the man. He reached out and gripped Kakashi tightly by the shoulder. It had been several months since Kakashi had last seen Might Guy and his team, who had been sent out on a long-term mission. Your team? Guy inquired. I didn't see their names, but... Safe, said Kakashi. Your team? Guy nodded. We're fine. We came back as soon as we heard the news. He shook his head, his face grim. I can't help but think, if we were here when it happened. The Lord Third considered your case, and made the decision to prioritize your team's mission, said Kakashi. He didn't expect the village to be overrun like this. Nobody did. Looking around, Guy drew to the corner, and Kakashi followed. In a low voice, Guy murmured, I just don't understand. The sensing barrier, our agents on the perimeter, how did something this big get past us? The working theory right now is that the enemy planted sleeper agents among us. Guy exhaled. Hence the village being shut down. While it's unfortunate, I see why it's a necessary measure. Still, about the third successor, I can't believe it. Kakashi arched an eyebrow. What do you mean? His footsteps sounded quietly through the hallway, attracting the guard's notice. At the sight of his face, the guard jumped to attention. Sir, you're back. I didn't get the notice, I thought you were supposed to be out until tomorrow. Keeping his face stern, he waved the guard off. In this time of great need, I cannot vacate my post any longer. Of course, sir, if you could just show your identification. Fixing the guard with a cool stare, he replied, enough. There is no time to waste. I need to examine the captive. Alone. The guard gulped. He was new to this station, but he'd heard the rumors about the analysis team's leader. Though outwardly he didn't strike as imposing a figure as Ibiki, Yamanaka and Noichi's skills in analysis and interrogation were an invaluable asset to the village. Yes, sir, said the guard, hastily unlocking the door. Unbeknownst to him, as Yamanaka and Noichi walked past, he let go of a kunai hidden in his waist holster. He knew exactly where to go, expertly navigating the maze of corridors. When he finally came to a stop, he stood in front of a lone cell holding a single captive. A young female with crimson hair eagerly pressed her face against the bars, her hands and feet otherwise bound in chains. Naruto, she exclaimed in delight. Without releasing his henge, Naruto nodded. Of course Karen would be able to see through his disguise, her sensory skills were truly on a different level from anyone he'd ever met before. I'm sorry, I couldn't come earlier, he said, holding his hands behind his back. But at the moment, all foreign ninja are being held for questioning. I told them everything I know, Karen replied instantly. Which wasn't much. So the hidden grass wasn't a part of the invasion? Karen shook her head. No. At least, not that I know of. And you don't know anything about the Akatsuki? With a look of regret, Karen shook her head again. No. I'm sorry. Nobody will believe me, but it's true. Naruto nodded, at the very least, he believed her. With her actions on the battlefield, she had proved herself more than trustworthy. I wanted to thank you for saving my teacher. I owe you a big debt. To his surprise, Karen's eyes filled with tears. That's the first time anyone's ever thanked me. That gave Naruto some pause. While he knew now how gifted the girl from Grass Country was, he knew next to nothing about her background or her past. But, he thought, he wanted to learn. He wanted to learn more about Karen, about Gaara, about the other Jinchuriki. He wanted to know more about the world, this time, not from his own lonely perspective, but from the perspective of others. Shouts began to sound a distance away, echoing through the empty halls. Had they finally discovered his ruse? You have to leave, said Karen, her tone frightened. They're coming, not for me. For you. I know, he replied. Everything was so clear to Naruto now. If his journey with Jiraiya had taught Naruto anything, it was that the world was large and filled with possibilities. If Kakashi's survival had shown him anything, it was that life was fleeting. After years of searching, he knew now what he wanted. This system of sealing tailed beasts into innocence and forcing Jinchuriki to act under the village's bidding. The world of shinobi, where figures lurked in the shadows and involved innocence in their struggle for power. This world in which his teammates had perished, in which his teachers suffered daily from guilt and despair. We endure. Naruto had had enough of it. Who are you? Someone who's going to change the world. That was what the masked man had said. But in Naruto's opinion, a world created by such a man would be no better than the current one. And as much as he had once resented being made the host of the Nine Tails, he knew now that it gave him the ability to make a difference. Naruto extended a hand towards Karen. I'm going to destroy this world. Will you join me? Without any hesitation, Karen reached through the bars and took his hand. Deep underground, a lone man kneeled in an isolated cell. While he was already practically blind, he had been blindfolded, with a seal written on the cloth, and each limb was bound in chains. The cell had just enough space for the man to lie down comfortably. The thick concrete walls had no doors or windows, and was further surrounded by 2 barriers, each manned by 4 ANBU that alternated on 12-hour shifts. This was just the security visible to the naked eye. Numerous hidden seals further surrounded the perimeter, a last failsafe in the case of a catastrophe. Even with such a system in place, the ANBU appeared visibly on edge. They all knew the history of the man they were guarding, knew he could kill them all in the blink of an eye if he somehow managed to escape. Oddly enough, the man in question seemed perfectly content to remain in his cell. Indeed, several nights' worth of food and rest appeared to have restored some color to his gaunt cheeks. A long shadow extended along the corridor. Silently, an older man stepped in front of the cell. He was accompanied by 2 ANBU. Curiously, the ANBU captain currently standing guard had never seen either of their masks before. Lower the barrier, commanded the man. The captain nodded. Yes, Hokage-sama. Standing back, he signaled to his men. The flames of the first barrier flickered, lighting up a stern face swathed in bandages. Then it faded away, plunging the cell into darkness. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.